Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage. This is a podcast, a video series, a set of conversations between myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer, and this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer. And we have conversations about designing better miniatures games. Well, for the last few weeks, we've been having conversations about whether you should design miniatures games at all, better or not. And Mike's been asking me some of my definitions as to why something should go one way or the other, and some of the things that have led me to go down one path or another particular design. And we've talked about laddering and zeroing and the different sort of skill loops that you want to put people through. Obviously, Mike has made the decision at times to design miniatures games or not to design miniatures games.
Belligerently, even when it's a bad idea.
Even when it's an appallingly bad idea. So he has a reason that he thinks it is good to design miniatures games rather than card games and counter games and board games. And Mike, you're going to explain what it is that makes you think a game should be a miniatures game rather than anything else.
Yeah, so the start of each of these conversations, we've kind of highlighted two key things that Glenn and I are completely convinced are like essential to what it is that miniature games are. And one of them is an obsession with spatial relationships. Like if a game is not about the relationships in space, absolute distances, relative positions, it ain't a miniature game as I design them. And the other thing is that through some magical alchemy, these games have found a form where they can accept any physical object really into the play space, and the magic circle will transmute them into something that the game and the player understands by simply putting a can of Coke in the middle of my Gaslands track. I can say, that's a heavy obstacle, and thus it is, and we know what to do with it. And there's almost no other game form that allows us that level of like I can't just like pull out my credit card, slip it into my hand of magic cards, and everyone is just cool with what that even is and how it works.
I
So
mean, definitely the credit card is the most powerful card in the game of Magic the Gathering, just to say.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's literally the driving force for it. Um, so I think for me, one of the things that's emergent from the ability to put anything into the magic circle of these games and have it be understandable is the fact that you can therefore make anything that you like, and you can bring anything that you like, and you can basically create your own miniature world. This freedom to place objects unlocks this, basically the primary for me aesthetic pleasure of this form, which is that I can basically be miniature sort of photographer. I can be miniature cinematographer. And a lot of the things that I do when I approach a game design is I'm sort of thinking visually, and I'm thinking about what it is that I would find both cool to see on the table, but also what I would want to see in my imagination, which I can find ways to express in these little static ways that will then fire my imagination to see a piece of cinema in front of me. And so uh, I think, and it's fun when you see this, like when you watch certain people on YouTube doing battle reports. Some people will do this and some people won't, but like because he filmed a couple of games of Hobgoblin recently. I was watching Peter and a couple of his friends on the Esoteric Order of Gamer recording some battle reports, and Peter is like me in that he will stop for a moment and he will get down to a certain angle, and he will look and he will go, look at this looks amazing. Have you seen this? Look at this. It looks absolutely fantastic with the painted miniatures and the painted terrain. It all just fits together. And it just looks like a miniature war game table. But like at that moment, with the investment that he's put into these objects and with that composition that he's looking at, there is a simple pleasure, an intrinsic pleasure, that you can place these models into a scene and you can explore that scene in 3 dimensions. You can move your viewpoint around that physical space, and also that this is part of an evolving picture and like a really slow stop motion 3D film. Like across the game, something will unfold in front of you, which for me, it's got a very primal kind of childish delight in it. And so I think for me, there's a piece of when should something be a miniatures game, which is, have I got the components in the game's kind of idea to create something that's worthy of pointing a camera at, but more than worthy of pointing a camera at, because I mean that sort of euphemistically. Is it worthy of me investing time in order to create this miniature world, and will I get something out of it? And I think that's both quite culturally, like, sort of, it seems to me that because there's a group of nerds that do this kind of thing in a specific set of genres, that it has a kind of magnetic attraction to certain visuals, but that it ought to be possible to do any number of kind of visually delightful expressions of, well, I want to see something and I would like to see it beautifully rendered in 3 dimensions so that I can enjoy it both statically and evolving through the game goes. Yeah, yes, that's what I mean.
I mean, the thing with that for me is that it's more about the freedom to create any visual than arguably the, let's at least say, average quality of visual created. It's almost like the difference between a sort of a set moment in a video game and just being allowed to happen upon, if you're playing an open world video game and you happen upon a beautiful valley as the lights at the right point, you get this amazing sort of visual. Whereas
Mm.
if you're playing a game with like set pieces and you walk into a certain room and then it looks up at
And the
this
camera is taken from you, and oh wow, something we made, and you're like,
yeah,
cool, you made that, well
and
done.
that was pre-triggered, and it's like you might never come across the valley in the open world game, but you will definitely see the amazing ballroom or whatever in the game with the set pieces. And it's like, most, certainly high quality tabletop boxed games, when you lay them out, all look great. And many of them have you lay out the components in such a way that create a vista and a tableau and something that's even beautiful. And lots of games are about like literally making beautiful pictures. Whereas I've played plenty of minis games where people have lined up against me with bases with a pile of metal pieces dropped on top, and they've gone, "Well, that is that thing. You can't. It's what you see is what you get. I've just not glued it together or painted it, and that definitively looks much worse than every boxed game, like in cinematic and visual appeal and flair that I've ever come across in my life." And it's like the the freedom of the fact that people can put anything onto the tabletop with these sorts of games involves the freedom that they can put down absolute baloney for one of these games and make
Right,
it incredibly ugly.
and critically, and listeners, Glenn has very many painted armies and mostly plays with painted models, and I care much more about this and rarely have painted armies. Make of that what you will. But I think you're absolutely hitting on the critical thing here, which is that the other side of this coin is player ownership, and I think it links into a couple of other things that we've talked about, which is um, the the ability to put anything into this magic circle and have it be accepted by the game, and the fact that, as we discussed in some previous episodes, like, these games and players of these games are relatively more tolerant of complexity. The complexity leads to depth in many cases in these games, which allows self-expression both in game terms but also in hobby terms. And so you can kind of use this self-expression or feel the potential to use this self-expression, which honestly is almost as important and probably is more valued overall, even if we don't admit it, to create your own stories, to differentiate yourself or your models or your armies from your peers. And that, I don't know, this, like, even if the mass produced entertainment experience is higher quality in every measurable dimension, you're the co-creator of this miniature world that's in front of you, and the stories that are emergent are your stories. And there's just an incredible sort of, I don't know, it's just way more meaningful as an act of play for me in many regards, where it's like, well, you and I created this together in front of us, this is play, rather than enjoying something that somebody else made and sort of sitting through. um I don't know, does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense, but I think, and I really would love to have like a full-on philosophical conversation about the nature of
I
game.
mean, literally, that's the purpose of this podcast, Glenn. Do it.
Well, no, look, I mean, to my
I
mind,
won't be able to keep up, but you're welcome.
no, I mean, to my mind, what you're talking about, there about is a defining feature of games as an art form, as a sort of a performative shared art form as
Mm.
opposed to other art forms. You know, quite the the act of play. Okay, so when you create a work of art, which is like a painting, you go for a process and then you produce a product, and the product is the work of art. The painting is the work of art. When you create a game, you go for a process to create a product that is not the work of art. And then that product creates a process which is shared with other people. And that process that it was created by the product that was created by the process is the work of art. And there's
Yeah.
something really weird about that. Something really ephemeral and peculiar and philosophically difficult that differentiates games from every other art form. Every other art form, the artist goes through a process, and the process is kind of unimportant. It doesn't really matter whether he's using oil paints or hanging upside down or whatever else. What matters is the product. We're in a place where the product kind of doesn't matter. The product isn't an art form. It isn't the art,
The
and
product is a tool that allows you to access the
to access
experience.
the actual piece of art. The actual piece of art is, because I think that art is about sort of instantiating a moment, taking a moment and making it into a permanent product. If an artist sees something, a painter sees something, they take that seeing and they put it onto a canvas or whatever else it happens to be. And now everybody can see what that artist saw. The moment has been turned into a permanent product of some kind. If a musician hears music, they can write that music down and it can be played, and then that can be produced again and again and again. A games designer is trying to instantiate what it is to make a certain set of decisions, to perform a certain set of actions. We can't put that into a thing in the way that we put a painting into a thing. We have to do it in such a way that we end up sharing it with another human being. And then that other human being sort of unwraps and creates it at the tabletop. I think that that's one of those things where this is more definitive, a thing about all games, as opposed to everything else sort of in the world, as opposed to it is
Right.
significantly a
What
thing about
whilst I agree with that on the grand scale, that like, and honestly, like listening to you talk, all I can see is Shannon's communication model of like the transmission of the signal to the receiver, and what we would normally think of as the sort of transmission of that idea is this work in the middle. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that yes, I agree with all of that in general terms. I think specifically, um, a comparison could be with role-playing games, where role-playing games allow me a sense of self-expression. They create the magic at the table. The instantiation is local to me. The thing that the games designer gave me was more akin to the score that I as a musician will perform from, not the piece of music as recorded. But it provides different modalities for that to emerge. It's about speech, it's about imagination, it's about theatre, it's about shared story creation. And the shared story creation, I think, is very much shared with miniature games. But miniature games modality is just ever so slightly different. It's about physical creation. It's about the sort of the self-expression of taking, shared objects that we can both buy. We can both buy the same Space Marines, but we can paint them differently and we can attach different stories to them. And, I guess a bit like the tactical elements of RPGs, we can also take the constraints that we're given and express ourselves in different game ways, different strategies and so forth. And so I think that yes, this is a subset of a broader generalization about the way that games function as art. But I think that when I'm thinking about the question, when should something be a miniatures game, I personally am absolutely starting from a position of, do I see opportunities? Do I feel opportunities to express both myself and to give other people the opportunity to express themselves and to tell stories using physical objects that they might be able to customize and create for themselves? Because I think if I'm not doing that, that is for me categorically the moment where I go, well, bollocks, this is just a boxed game. Like, I'll just give you some stuff that's in no way customizable.
Okay, I mean, for me, I think that the question I'd be looking at there, or the way that I would interpret that is where is the place of interaction between human beings within this game? And what I mean is, it's like if I'm playing a miniatures tabletop war game, I'm
Mm.
expressing myself like on the tabletop in the way that my things like clump into your things on the tabletop. If I'm playing, I'll go sort of right, sort of in many ways down the other end of the scale. Uh, Something like Blood on the Clock Tower, some sort of uh, social deduction game, werewolves, whatever it happens to be. The interaction point is like is very directly, me talking to you and trying to convince you of something which is a lie. And everything else is sort of out of the way, and I'm only expressing myself directly to you as a person individual. Now, I could play, werewolves, Miller's Hollow, with a little mini of a guy, and I move him around the table over to another person, and that could be the person that I have to interact with. But that mini is total bullcrap at that point. It's not the game. It's not the way it's expressing. It's not the thing that I'm meant to care about. It's not where I'm meant to be putting myself while I'm playing. When I'm when I paint a particular mini and model a particular mini, it's because I'm like putting myself to some degree into that army. They are the people who are representing me, and I am at some point trying to imagine what they are seeing literally tactically at various points. And the thing that is the focus is the minis, and that is what I want a person to pour themselves into in a way that I don't want them to do when I'm designing like a social deduction game.
Sure, but like, because we're getting philosophical, like the the fact that I'm obsessed with these miniatures as the subject of my camera, like, it can still be an indirect subjectivity where, like, I am, everything about this miniature story is important to me. Like, I am telling the story of this character, I'm obsessed with this character, you've got your own story. We're overblowing this for effect, but, like, we both just painted some miniatures, like, it's fine. But, like, there are miniatures, and we, ideally we are thinking, well, they at least have names and they possibly even have some imagined backstory. But I think that, I'm imagining shooting a movie of that character, whether, literally or kind of, um half-assedly. I'm concerned with them as the protagonists of my story. And maybe in an army game, I'm much more interested in a couple of characters or that one champion that ends up emergently being an interesting moment in my narrative. um
Yeah, I think possibly, and this is a personal thing, I'm just not that interested in those kinds of things.
mm.
I'm interested in where two players meet each other. I don't really care about what it looks like, if I'm in all honesty. I care about where you meet another human being and where you press up against them, and what then happens. And it's like, so
But then
when I
why make the effort on the hobby side? Like, why take the time as you have done to, like, make a wonderful, ogre army where every hand is,
oh,
impressed in resin to make a frozen hand? Like, what does that mean for you? What does it signify?
because I personally like doing that, and I have pride within it, and
Is it purely intrinsic, or is it there
for,
an extrinsic social loop as well?
No, I think for me personally, it's just it's the whole part. It's part of the hobby, and it's a process that I go through, and it's a
Mm.
process that I inherently enjoy. But it's not something that, as a game designer, I give multiple hoots about. Um, and
It's
if
fascinating. That's
and
absolutely fascinating.
and if like if
Because if you derived value from that, like why wouldn't it be something that you would then consider engendering in others?
because it, what I'm trying to do with a game is focus on a particular experience and get to that experience with the minimum of things, of barriers to it possible.
Mm.
Like we SSO is a game about you deciding which of your friends is going to die. And if I could do it without using cards and counters, I would do it without using those things. The game has the bare minimum of what I can give you to make that happen in a sci-fi survival horror setting. And if I can get you to interact with another human being in an
Mm.
interesting way with fewer components, I will do it with fewer components. Now, I know the thing is, I like painting minis, I like modeling minis, I like having an army with a theme to it. I could do that without any kind of game, and people do that with no kind of game attached.
Ah, see, it's odd because you often say, "Well, I'll only paint a miniature if I've got a game to play it."
Yeah, I will, but that's me. I can make these decisions for myself.
No, no, no. Yeah, and I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just. It's for me. It's like it's part of that. Like it's part of that complete package. Like, well, I could build an army, but why would I? Like, I need a reason. I need a driver. I need a flywheel to get that going. Um, and like for me, when I think about Gaslands, like where people are spending time making Gaslands cards but not playing the game, I'm still delighted that I triggered an imaginative process in them that's led to something enjoyable to them. And one of the things that I love, one of the core reasons that I make the kinds of list building systems that I do make, and I've worked on 3 games in the last 3 months, and they all look exactly like the last 3 games. Like I bloody love taking the infinity of possible units, boiling them down into 10 choices, and then allowing you to bolt guns on it. Like it just feels great because that's how miniatures work as well. And now I can accept any sort of physical object just exactly as these games are good at, which is I provide simple frameworks into which you can say, well, sod it, any building that I make, any miniature that I construct, and in my case, like any base you put it on, because why should that matter? Like all of these things are saying I want to provide to people the ability to own their experience and to create their own space, physical space populated with things that they have physically made, because for me that is almost the primary joy, and that's probably why I'm terrible at miniature games, but like that for me is the primary joy of engaging with the thing in the first place.
Okay, so I'll say, so I've just sort of designed a game that actually has built into it kit bashing and
Mm.
rules to encourage kit bashing and drive that to be part of the game. And I do not particularly care whether or not there are minis in the game. Or get rid of them if I could. You really care about minis being there in the cinematography of it, and you've just designed a game where people shove poker chips around the tabletop to be a Pacific fleet. What's that all about?
I don't know. That one I think is that one I think is that actually the cinematography that I have in my mind is the maps that you see. And so for me, the visuals still drive the decision making, which is that you can't express why the Pacific War was interesting unless you zoom out to the point where there's no possible way that you can have a miniature that makes any sense. And so for me, the cinematography is still driving it. It's just that the cinematography demands that you have, those maps with animated circles where it's just like, and then this thing came over here, and then this thing came over here. So oddly, I think the cinematography drove me to what's the easiest, because initially I purchased a number of like 160 millimeter MDF circular bases, like sort of Warhammer monster bases, and I was trying to see if you could fit like 1/6000th scale, like fleet miniatures, so that they would look comfortable as a battle group. Because, like, when you've got those aerial shots of, like, carrier battle groups, like, they look grand. It's a really good, but you can't make the physics work. The cinema of, like, the story doesn't work, because the story is interesting when you've got something that's 600 miles wide. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think I think it does come down to that, like, yeah.
Okay. I mean, for me, it feels like the Pacific Command is more of a game about the men taking the bluffs of 1,000 men's lives, and the betting and and that's to me why it's more interesting that it's a set of poker chips, because that is the thing. You are interacting with another human being in the way that you are hiding what is on the tabletop.
I think that's why, when I found the solution, when I got to the possibility of poker chips as a solution, I was like, bam, everything clicks now. But, like, up until that point, I was experimenting with other kinds of solutions that still abstracted away from, the physical silhouettes of ships not being important. But you're absolutely right. Like, the ability to, the sort of, the visual image of, like, two admirals looking at each other over a poker table, and one going to call the other's bluff. Like, yeah, that's why it then clicked together.
Okay, well, I mean, that conversation got a bit philosophical and
That's
freewheeling.
what happens at the end of a mini series.
Absolutely. This was a conversation about why it is that Mike designs miniatures games as opposed to other sorts of games. We just had a bunch of conversations about why I make a thing be a miniatures game as opposed to another sort of game. Maybe you have a reason that you will make a game as a miniatures game as opposed to a card game, or a board game, or a counters game, or vice versa. Tell us what makes you think a game should be a minis game. It should be the sort of game that we're talking about, as opposed to something else. Does it matter that you're ice skating uphill to do it? If you can do it, that and nobody else has done it, maybe that's exactly the point of doing it. Tell us these things and more in the comment section. Hit the like and subscribe buttons while you're down there. They
Do
they
it.
they enjoy being hit. They're weirdos like that. Follow, if you're in that section, through to the links section. Go across onto our Discord and tell us there why you design the games that you design. And if you're looking at links and following them through, there's one to Mike's Patreon, from where you can give him delicious, delicious money with which he can eat coffee or something. Um, but other than that, I think that's going to be it from this episode of Rule of Carnage, this conversation. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. I'm developing a royal wave there, I think.
That's excellent.